Are experiences proof of God? I don't think so, but two Christian apologists seem to think that because someone can experience beauty, therefore beauty exists, that also applies to God. So I'm going to try and see if I can make sense of what they're saying. Hello, I'm the Skeptic. I watch videos on YouTube that make extraordinary claims, whether that's flat earth or strange conspiracies, but mostly the claim that a god is real, and then explain why I can't accept the position. Before we get into today's video, please do subscribe, hit that bell notification to be alerted for my next video, and drop a like. That would be awesome. In this God Squad video, Capturing Christianity have an excerpt from a longer video, and the clips from today are already from an 11-minute video, so goodness knows how long the original is. And this excerpt has 10 experiential arguments for a god. I was intrigued when I saw the title, so decided to see if what they had to say could convince me that I should start believing in a god. With almost 100,000 subscribers, surely what they have to say would be given some credit, right? You don't get to 100,000 subscribers by spouting nonsense. Or do you? Let's give it a go. Looks like I've found more source material for content on this channel then. Oh, that reminds me, the link to the original video is in my description, as well as a playlist of more videos on this theme from me.
Well, let's get back into it. Let's get the arguments back on the screen here. So, experiential arguments is the next section. We've got a quote from William James. I'll let you take it away.
William James? You're starting out with someone who already was an outspoken believer. Confirmation bias much? For those who don't know, William James was an American philosopher of religion. He's fairly well known for his paper and lecture, The Will to Believe. He put together this essay to defend, in certain cases, the adoption of a belief without prior evidence of its truth. Already we're starting off on a bad foot.
Yeah, so you can't really talk about arguments from religious experience without at least some examples.
How can you prove an experience was a god? Easily dismissed, right?
Here's one. This is from William James's book, The Varieties of Religious Experience.
A book that I haven't read, because just from the title, it sounds as though it's trying to confirm that unprovable experiences are proof of a god.
He says this: I was in perfect health. This is a report he got from someone else. I was in perfect health. We were on our 6th day of hiking and in good training. I never felt fatigue, hunger, or thirst. My state of mind was equally healthy. When all at once I experienced a feeling of being raised above myself, I felt the presence of God. I tell of the thing just as I was conscious of it, as if his goodness and his power were penetrating me altogether. The throb of emotion was so violent that I could barely tell the boys to pass on and not wait for me. I then sat down on a stone, unable to stand any longer, and my eyes overflowed with tears. I thanked God that in the course of my life he had taught me to know him. Then slowly the ecstasy left my heart. That is, I felt that God had withdrawn the communion which he had granted, and I was able to walk on, but very slowly. So strongly was I still possessed by the interior emotion. At bottom, the expression most apt to render what I felt is this: God was present, though invisible. He fell under no one of my senses, yet my consciousness perceived him.
Not once is any way of telling a god was present offered here. This person had a feeling, so what? Could that feeling have been misunderstood and was actually fatigue presenting itself in a different way? Could invisible pixies be dancing all over this person's body and that forced the person to sit? It's funny how when people can't explain something, they instantly fill in the gap with God.
In his book, James catalogs just story after story after story of people having these sorts of experiences. And here's another one.
Lots and lots of stories don't add up to proof. It's still lots of individual anecdotes. I love the quote, "The plural of anecdote isn't data."
That we won't read, but I just had two just to kind of get our sense of what's being talked about here. Now, these are very dramatic experiences, but people like St. Teresa and Brother Lawrence speak of being intensely aware of the continued presence of God, not in a dramatic way, but sort of in a continual way, such that the most remarkable and awful experience imaginable to them would be if God removed his presence. That's what they say.
Is it just me, or do you just hear random words that don't really give anything other than noise? So what that these people said that? How does them saying, "I would be upset if God wasn't present in my life," make God real? Wouldn't it be better to prove that there were gods first and then worry about if it was in your life or not?
And hence you have some discussion of the dark night of the soul when saints feel like God has removed his presence from them. Okay, so we have some examples there to get a sense of what sort of experiences we're talking about. Okay, we have our first argument. Religious experience as analogous to aesthetic experience. Now for this, let's define an aesthete as an aesthetic expert. So think of like a wine taster or a musician or a painter or a food critic. Okay.
Hold up. Wine exists, food exists, paint exists, looking at physical things is real, so how is any of this analogous to God? All of those things are provable.
Not movie critics, because all movie critics suck, apparently.
Do they, though? Or do you just not believe what they say? Funny that. I know other situations where that's applicable.
Just of the highbrow end. If the aesthetic experiences of aesthetes justifies their aesthetic beliefs, the religious experiences of religious people justifies their religious beliefs.
What if you don't agree with what an aesthete says? They may find something beautiful, whereas someone else may not.
So the aesthetic experiences of aesthetes justifies their religious beliefs. Or the aesthetic experiences of aesthetes justifies their aesthetic beliefs.
It only justifies it to that person, not necessarily to everyone else. There'd have to be demonstrable reasons to encourage other people to see it that way too.
So the religious experiences of religious people justifies their religious beliefs. So religious experience of God justifies belief in God.
It only justifies it to the person that experienced it, and even then it doesn't prove it. It's basically saying, I experienced this, I can't explain it, therefore God. I don't accept that. But how does the person that experienced the thing that they experienced know that it was a God that they experienced?
John Hick's work kind of launched discussion of the argument from religious experience for contemporary philosophy of religion. And the main idea is that, look, if widespread, consistent, and persistent religious experience of God is unreliable, then so is our sense experience generally, because we have just... We seem to experience God, or people claim to have religious experiences just as frequently as sense experience generally. So if one is not trustworthy, the other one isn't trustworthy.
But it's also been proven that senses can be tricked and therefore would be incorrect in their assessment. So how would we go about proving when our senses are correct and when they're not?
So it's a kind of a parody argument, and you'll see this come up again as we go through a few more. Swinburne's famous argument relies on the principle of credulity, which has already sort of showed up a few times. If it seems to you that P, then you're prima facie justified in believing P.
Great! It seems to me that griffins are real since I find feathers around all the time. I believe in griffins, which means, by this logic, there must be griffins. Let's just take a moment to look at prima facie. Accept as correct until proven otherwise. This is backwards. You shouldn't be able to say the librarian killed the old lady until it's been proven that he didn't. It's better to say, I don't know, until a logical explanation has been demonstrated.
It seems to me that God exists, so I'm justified in believing God exists.
Rejected.
And we have Plantinga on proper basicality of belief in God, which is probably familiar to a lot of your audience. If you want more on that, look at his paper, Is Belief in God Properly Basic? ? Okay, Alston. We'll read this one. Perceptual experience is reliable. Religious experience has the same basic epistemic structure as perceptual experience. So the structure is that there's a perceiver, there's an object perceived, and the perceiver's phenomenal experience of the object or qualities of the object.
But objects exist and so can be proven. This is going back to, if I can imagine it, it's real. I just imagined Alicia Keys knocked on my door, so that must mean she did. Let me check. Alicia? Alicia? No. Dang it.
Religious experience seems to have the exact same perceptual structure, but if that's true, then we should think that it's just as reliable as perceptual experience generally. Now, you can't really talk about Alston and religious experience without his answer to why perception is reliable. And his groundbreaking book, Perceiving God, he argues that there's no non-circular way to demonstrate perception, just general perception, how it's reliable. So he proposes the most practical way. The reason we do trust it is with this principle. If P is formed on the basis of a socially established doxastic practice, then P is justified. So we do typically treat perception as justified. It's just a social practice that we have. But in the same way, it's a social practice that we have. We form religious beliefs based on socially established doxastic practice. So
just another way of saying what I just said about imagining things into being. Keep going.
We shouldn't think that our religious beliefs are any less reliable than our perceptual beliefs.
But the things we perceive can also be wrong.
So the occurrences of those experiences is evidence that God exists. Just generally, and especially the evidential value of those experiences increases if they occur in various cultures and at various times to people of various backgrounds, socioeconomic status, and so forth. So because they do occur in such divergent ways and in such variety, the evidential force of those experiences is increased.
I beg to differ. In every instance that I've heard of a religious experience, I would always question, how do you know it was a god?
Proust's ontomystical argument, if it seems to S that P, it's a little more modest than the principle of credulity, that we should presume that P is possible. Not that P is the case, but just that it's possible. Now, mystics have experiences which it seems to them that God exists. If so, then we should presume God possibly exists. If we should presume God possibly exists by S5, we should presume he does exist.
Lots of different people having unique experiences that they either don't understand or can't explain doesn't equal a god. This goes back to the anecdote not equaling data quote.
There are many people who believe God has promised to them to help them develop spiritually, who then do develop spiritually.
How do we tell the difference between someone who thinks they've developed spirituality and someone who actually has?
This phenomenon is widespread enough that it's evidence that God basically keeps his promise. He does help people develop spiritually.
Can you prove that beyond someone's feeling?
Probably had people on your channel before talk about near-death experiences. Am I right?
Yep.
So let's not talk about the nature of them. Let's just look at how they could be used in arguments for God's existence or life after death. Let's just go ahead and scroll through these. I just formulated how they could be used as arguments for theism.
I'm actually stunned. How is any of this relevant to a god's existence? It seems to be trying to justify what people think, therefore truth, which we all know isn't acceptable. Oh, well, that was an abrupt ending. So, feelings are justification of existence. Pfft, what do you think? How would you have answered these arguments? Let me know in the section below. I feel that these apologetics fell flat and didn't offer us anything new, so we can skeptic these faulty arguments as being dealt with. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.